Well, thank you, Mr. President. I want to compliment Senator Shaheen for doing her homework on Syria, traveling, understanding the strategic implications of losing in Syria for the United States and our allies. In New Hampshire and South Carolina, not a lot of talk about Syria. It's not that people don't care, it's just we've got our plate full here at home with all of our needs in our own backyard. And the only thing I can tell people throughout the country, you ignore these problems at our own peril. The wave of refugees that came out of Syria when the civil war first began is going to replicate itself. Or I guess we can all sit on the sidelines and watch 3 million people be killed. I hope we don't do that. So Idlib is a province in northwestern Syria where the opposition is basically in a corner near the border of Turkey. Assad, with the help of Iran and mostly Russia, is trying to break their will and literally destroy them. Within this group of people of about 3.5 million, there's some really hardcore al-Qaeda types, al-Nusra, all kind of names associated with the groups, but they're radical Sunni Islamists, and they would bring ISIS back roaring. We don't want them to win the day, and we sure as heck don't want Iran to control Syria, and I think it would be a huge mistake for the United States to let Assad prevail in this war, and let me tell you why. It never ends with him. Every radical Sunni Islamist group in the world will use Assad's presence in Syria as a recruiting tool. He's a proxy of Iran. Without Iran, there would be no Assad. So you've created a great recruiting opportunity for radical Islam if you let Assad prevail. Our country, on multiple occasions, has said Assad must go. Why? Because he's a war criminal. He's lost all legitimacy. Russia will have basically trumped the United States, no pun intended, in the backyard of the Mideast, Syria. And President Trump, to his credit, changed his decision to withdraw all forces in northeastern Syria and have a holding force with more international involvement to prevent ISIS from coming back in the Manbij area, making sure Iran doesn't come down and take over with Assad that part of Syria, and that Turkey doesn't come into northeastern Syria to deal with the Syrian Democratic Forces, the Kurdish elements of the YPG. A small American contingent force has brought some stability to northeastern Syria. Our Kurdish allies who stepped up to the plate feel like they're in a better spot. We have to realize that Turkey has a legitimate concern about the YPG elements, but to keep everybody apart and make sure ISIS doesn't come back. Nobody's talking about Idlib. President Trump, to his credit, did tweet on 2nd of June, just a few weeks ago, hearing word that Russia, Syria, and to a lesser extent, Iran, are bombing the hell out of Idlib province in Syria and indiscriminately killing many innocent civilians. The world is watching this butchery. What is the purpose? What will it get you? Stop. Good tweet. The only way it's going to stop is for Russia and Iran to pay a price for helping Assad. So it's Russian jets with Syrian jets that are indiscriminately bombing civilians in Idlib. If Idlib falls and these people flush out of Syria, you're going to have another wave of refugees coming to Turkey, which is saturated, and eventually Turkey is going to open up the floodgates back into Europe. And we're going to repeat this all over again. To my European friends and allies, you've been reluctant, except the French and the British, to help us in northeastern Syria with a holding force. How many times do you have to see the same movie to understand we need to do something differently? What do you tell European populations that we don't have the will to put a few thousand troops in Syria to make sure that we're not flooded in Europe with people fleeing for their lives? So it just never ceases to amaze me how quickly we forget the lessons of the past. As to Idlib, they've broken the agreement we had. Turkey, to their credit, has been trying to find a political solution in that part of Syria. And Senator Sheen and I both know the only way you end this war is through a political negotiation in Geneva. By having some American forces with our partners in northeastern Syria, we have leverage over the outcome. If we could stand aside down in Idlib, we'd have more leverage to allow the Syrian people to heal their own country. So as these attacks escalate, and they will, the president and his team, in conjunction with the civilized world, needs to come up with an Idlib plan. Now, what I want to do with Senator Shaheen is come up with some sanctions or some policies directed at the impending disaster called Idlib. I want us to put on the record our objection to what Russia, Iran, and Assad's doing, and try to craft some consequences and actually work with the administration to stop what will be inevitable if we don't send the right signal, which will be the slaughter of hundreds of thousands of innocent people, a new wave of refugees, and putting radical Sunni Islam on steroids, because they'll come to the fight if you don't. So here's your choice to the free world. If you don't get involved in Syria and try to end this madness, radical Sunni Islam will gladly take your place. And that's not a good outcome. There is no winning in that situation. If Assad wins, we lose. If the radical Sunni Islamist al-Nusra types win, we lose. The good news is the best way to win is to help the Syrian people. The Syrian people don't want to be dictated anymore by Assad. That's how this all started. They're tired of living under his control. And they're not radical people by nature. They're not turning to ISIS as the answer to Assad. Give them a choice. It's in our interest to be involved to some extent. We're not the world's policemen, but we are the glue that holds the world together. And Syria can only be put back together through peace negotiations where the parties have some leverage over their adversaries. It's not just a humanitarian crisis in the making. This is going to change the balance and the power in Syria and the Mideast in a very bad way. You're going to have a never-ending conflict between Iranian proxies and radical Sunni Islamic groups in Syria unless you defang both. And doing nothing sounds good on paper until you realize what happens when you ignore a problem. End on this. On September the 10th, 2001, America did not have one soldier in Afghanistan, not one dime of aid to Afghanistan. We didn't even have an ambassador to Afghanistan. We just watched as the Taliban took over, put women in soccer stadiums and killed them for sport because they wore the burqa too short. They blow up statues of the Buddha, and we were under the illusion, well, that's their problem, not ours. Well, it eventually became our problem because the people doing this stuff to women and religious artifacts of other cultures are compelled by God to deal with us. If you think leaving them alone ends this conflict, you don't understand what the conflict's about. They're driven by a religious ideology that has no place for anybody in this room. Our friends in Israel are moderate Muslims. So you either deal with them now or you deal with them later. Assad is in a different category, but just as evil, same kind of butchery. And I am here to tell you, to Europe, you better up your game when it comes to Idlib, because you're going to pay a heavy price. To the Trump administration, I really appreciate what you've done in northeastern Syria. I appreciate the tweet of the president on June 2nd, but we got to do more than tweet. And we in the Senate need to offer some assistance to the administration and our allies, and working with Senator Shaheen, we'll try to find a way to move forward. And I appreciate her interest. There's not a whole lot of upside to talking about things like this in modern American politics, but you're always going to be viewed well by history when you address a problem, when you stand up against evil, and when you try to do something about it. It may not be popular for the moment, but time will prove you right. Thank you, Senator Shaheen. With that, I yield.